Preservation District Ordinance is now in session. Mr. George, you want to stand and have some conversation about Preservation District?
I think everybody's been here before, so I won't belabor this any longer. This is hopefully the final legislative step to pass the Historic Preservation District. Everyone in the room will probably recall that it started way back when the mayor appointed a study committee. The study committee met over several months, did a lot of work, recommended a district, recommended a ordinance, and then presented it to the zoning commission. The zoning commission, they then tweaked it a little bit and then sent it up to the town council for its consideration. I made a long presentation, I guess in November, and then we had another hearing at the beginning of the month where the town council voted to adopt it for the first time, and so we're here again tonight, hopefully for the second reading and the adoption. And I'm here to answer any questions anyone has, but that's my presentation.
Questions on the preservation ordinance for George? Or you're good? Cancel, delete draft. Oh, okay. Delete draft.
Glad you got it.
Tell them we got a few copies of the budget here, if they want.
We have a few copies of the budget if anyone would like to get a copy if you don't already have one.
I'll pass them out for you. Thank you, Jason. You're welcome. We don't just hand them out to everyone, they've been in the office. Come on now. Don't act like everybody else always does.
At this time, we will close out the public hearing for the preservation district. And this is now, 22 budget amendment and 2023 budget proposal. And I would like to introduce to you Mr. Bill Abear, our CPA, who worked with Mr. Bruce Harrell for several years, I think about 17 years ago, and we will now have him come.
Yeah, good evening, thank you. I used to work with Bruce about 14 years, and I've got my own business. I've been doing it for about 17 years for myself. And so I've been asked to come up and assist in amending the budget and in proposing next year's budget. Now, what I'm gonna do tonight, I'm gonna tell you a couple of the important things that are in next year's budget, and then I wanna talk to you a little bit about the budget process. And then I know we have some new people coming on, some old people coming out, and I wanna talk to you a little bit about fund accounting and what, and how some of this stuff works, if you don't mind. And the reason is not to talk, is because there's no reason for you to know fund accounting unless you do it for a living, and so it may assist everyone going forward. But anyway, you know, your outgoing mayor wanted to make sure that there were some things in the budget to help the town, the recreation park, and so I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, we'll talk about the different funds. The fire department, we have $80,000. That budget for 23 includes $80,000 for the purchase of a new fire truck, and also $19,913 for fixing an engine or engine one. Now, whenever we do a budget, the way we do it is, you always want to get with the department heads. You want to get with the police chief, you want to get with the fire chief, you know, streets and roads, and and we'll sit down with the mayor, and everybody kind of puts together a wish list. You know, we need this piece of equipment, we need this, and then we put it together in the form of a budget, and then we look at all the numbers and to see if that wish list can come true. And so we got with the police chief and the fire chief, and these were some of the things that they had requested to be in their budget. Also, in the enterprise fund, we budgeted $60,000 in repair and maintenance to the water fund related to the barn roof repairs and replacement and some electrical work on some lighting. And then also there's going to be a mini excavator that they'll purchase off state contract. Now that's going to be handled a little bit different. It'll be depreciated over a useful life. But anyway, let's go to page 4. I wanted to show you a couple things. Basically down under recreation park project, we have $50,000 budgeted for the community center repairs and improvements. That's always good. $30,000 for repairs and improvements to Martin Luther King Park, and $30,000 for playground lighting and equipment. And I think those are things that probably the mayor, probably close to his heart, wants to make sure that the rec park and all that's taken care of for the kids and that type of thing. So he's probably asking your council to approve the budget, put those numbers in there for next year to kind of get those repairs taken care of. And so whenever we do a budget, we also do a budget message. And it's really just for transparency. It kind of covers the big things that are in the budget. And so those are some of the things that you would want to see. You know, what do we have capital expenditures and those type of things, repairs. And so those are some of the items that are in the budget that would stand out in the budget message. Now, the other thing I want to talk to you a little bit about, we can go to page 7 if you would. And so when we talk, go to page 7, and I want to talk to you a little bit. Now, if you heard the word fund, F-U-N-D, then you might use it in a sentence like this: we have funds at First Guaranty Bank. But that's not really that's not really what it means in governmental accounting, okay? A fund is what we call a self-balancing set of accounts, charge accounts. And so we have cash, receivables, liabilities, revenues, and expenses. And each fund has different revenues and different things that are paid out of that fund, okay? Now, the common one, the main operating fund is what we call the general fund. And in that general fund, you have different departments. You have the police department, we have some of the fire and protection, streets, the mayor and the alderman's salary are in there, that goes under general and admin. And then you have certain revenues that go into that general fund. And so if you would, we'll take a look, starting on page 7, at some of the different types of revenues that get deposited. Now, there are also bank accounts in the general fund too. That's where the money gets put in and of course gets paid. But when we do this budget, we're looking at the different types of revenues that make up the general fund, along with the other funds too. We'll look at this. So we have some things called charges for services, and we've kind of followed the same format that the other CPA was using. We may change this up a little bit going forward, but when we did the budget, one thing that we do in the first column here, we have what was proposed last year for this year. That's called the original budget. And so this was the original numbers for 22. This is how it's going to be laid out. And then we come in the second column, we have kind of our actual numbers. This is kind of how we finished up through October, which is about 10 months out of the year. And then we have to do a projection of the next 2 months. Then we add the actual projection and we say, okay, we think this is going to be our amended budget. And so when you're doing this, if you look, first of all, I want you to understand a couple things. I want you to understand what goes into the general fund, what these funds are, and then I want you to understand the budget process. And so the first thing you'll see is the different types of revenues. Charges for services. You have various things that go in here, just some very simple things, just miscellaneous charges. Now, if you go down to the second group, fines and forfeitures, this is your police department. This would be police tickets and fines and stuff like that. Okay, and that would help with his department. Grants, we budgeted an LGAP grant. I don't see that we got it, or energy beauty grant. We haven't gotten it as to my knowledge. And then you go down to intergovernmental. There was some beer tax, and then fire district reimbursement, 2% fire district money. And so those are intergovernmental amounts. Now, you can see that what we do when we do the proposed budget for the next year, whenever you do a budget, you estimate what your revenues are and you budget your expenses. Okay, now let me explain that to you. Suppose you were doing a budget at home and you cleared $2,000 and your wife cleared $2,000. Okay, that's what you clear. So that's what you put in a bank account. So our revenues are $4,000. Okay, that's what we have going in the bank account. Now, how are we going to spend that? Okay, so then we have to budget our expenses. And so we got a house note, an energy bill, and a car note. And when you start writing down the numbers that you pay each month, you're determining how you're going to spend that $4,000. And so if you have something left, maybe you get to go out and eat. But if you don't, you just have to pay bills with it, right? And so what you're doing is you're estimating what your revenues are going to be. And you have different types of revenues. And then when you say, this is what we have coming in, we have to live on this, right? And so then you budget the expenses. Well, how are we going to spend this? How are we going to break it down? Now, when you're doing a budget, there's this thing called carryover money or fund balance. And fund balance is if you take your assets minus your liabilities, it's what's left. It's called, if you did a statement of net worth for the bank, you said you listed all your assets minus your mortgages and debt, that would be your net worth. That's what's left, okay? So whenever you're doing a budget, if you have some carryover money, some fund balance, and let's pretend like it's 100,000 and your revenues are $1 million, okay, so you can add those two together, 1,100,000, and your expenses can't be more than 1,100,000, okay, because that's all you have. And so your revenues plus your beginning fund balance, your expenses can't be more than that, okay? Now, whenever we propose revenues for the next year, we always kind of do them very conservatively with just a very small increase. And the reason is, it's kind of a conservative budget, because if we got real excited and we thought that revenues were gonna jump up 50%, are you asking a question?
Yeah, I want to ask a
I
question.
beg- Okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
Mr. Aber,
I'm sorry, Roger, you were.
could you explain to the public and the new guard what exactly is a restricted account versus an unrestricted account?
Yes, yeah. So a restricted account is this: if you have debt, if you have bonds in the utility fund, so this is what happens. Let's say that we were going to fix the water tower, and we need $1 million or $2 million, okay? This is the way it works. You issue some revenue bonds, which means that you're gonna pay the debt based on the revenue from the utility fund, from water sales, sewer sales. But you're gonna have this bond covenant, and what that means is the attorneys are gonna draw it up, and they're gonna tell you, listen, I want you to open 2 or 3 different other bank accounts. And every month, I want you to put some money in that bank account so that you're going to be able to pay this debt in case something bad happens. And they force you to put that money into that bank account, and that's called restricted cash. And so a restriction of cash, or restricted cash, is always comes from an outside. It's always an outside party, like a bond covenant. And so when your cash is restricted, it means that you're in compliance with your bond covenant. You're putting money away. And the reason that you're doing that is when a municipality, like town of Kentwood, whenever you issue bonds, you're issuing municipal bonds. That means the public is buying these bonds. And so they have to make sure that you're putting money away to pay them, so the public can get their money back. So restricted money is when an outsider or a third party requires you to put money away. A designated money is a little bit different. Like the board could designate some money. They could say, look, we want to build this building next year. We want to take 100,000 of this fund balance. We're going to designate it for that building. Now, they could undesignate it also, though. They could, but it would have to be a board. Board would have to designate and undesignate. Jeff, was that, what line are you in that?
Essentially, restricted accounts are basically like when you get they work similar to grants. You can only use that money for the specific purpose that's listed on said grant, correct?
Well, so yeah, now a grant is restricted cash too, it's restricted revenue. But if you're talking about a grant, let me tell you here what happens here. If you're gonna get what's called a COPS grant to buy a piece of equipment, well, you better buy that piece of equipment. That money's restricted to buy that piece of equipment. That's what happens there. So if you get a grant and the grant is to be used for that water tower, then it's restricted for that water tower. So therefore, you know, it comes in as cash, but it kind of goes in and out. And so therefore, that grant is restricted for whatever you wrote. See, when you get a grant, you're writing an application for a grant. You're saying, I want to apply for this grant, and they'll ask you, what are you going to use it for? And you say, well, I'm going to use it for this. And then you better use it for that, or you're going to have an audit violation. Okay. Is that closer?
Pretty much, yeah.
If
So,
it's something else you're thinking, I can tell it. I know it. You just got to give me where you want to go.
yeah, so the concept of a self-restriction does exist, or would that fall more under a designation?
So a self-restriction or self-designation, the board can designate money in the form of a meeting or a vote. And so the same way with, if you have some cash and you say, look, you know, we want to put this money towards this new building, and we're going to designate it, you know, that this money's being designated. Now, it's not a third-party restriction, and the board can undesignate it, but technically, unless they undesignate it, it's designated for that particular project. So you can
Okay.
have an internal designation of some of your cash, but it's different than a third-party restriction.
Yeah.
And because that outside restriction, you can't change. It's kind of those bond covenants and stuff like that. Anybody else have any? Okay. So anyway, so as we look at this general fund, I'm gonna walk you through some of these things. We have the grant, the intergovernmental revenues, which is your beer tax. And that means that's money that comes from another government. It's called an intergovernmental, like a beer tax comes from the state of Louisiana. And then another thing that you have in your general fund is licenses and permits, which are people that have stores, they'll come in and get a license. You may have a liquor license, electrical permits. So some of your revenues that go in your general fund are licenses and permits. And then obviously we have a pretty good category of miscellaneous revenue. Now notice we're on page 8 now, kind of towards the bottom. On behalf of payments called supplemental pay. If you've ever saw this, your police department and sometimes your firemen will get a payment from the state, and this is called a supplemental pay, okay? And what happens is they want the town to pay the payroll taxes on that money, okay? So what you do is you put it on their check and you take it off, but you calculate the payroll taxes. And so the employee pays payroll and then the company matches it. And it's really an in and an out. So when you have supplemental pay in, you'll also have supplemental pay out on your budget, but you're paying the payroll tax on it. So usually this is for the police officers, maybe some firemen will get supplemental pay, okay? Know about that? And look, so let's go on to page 9, I want to show you something. So here's a term that, page 9 is called ad valorem tax. Now, let me tell you another common name is called property tax. And so if you didn't know that, it's okay, because I didn't know it at one time either. But ad valorem tax is property tax. And so this is the tax that you have from the millages that goes into the general fund. And so this is another revenue for the general fund. Now, let's just take a look at a couple things. Our proposed revenue was $1,905,250. And then we're amending the budget up to $1,951,000. It means we're increasing it a little bit. Now, our sales tax look like it's gonna increase a little bit. The last number was $1,258,000. Everything else is probably in line. Some things are gonna be up, some things are down. We didn't get that $30,000 grant that we looked at. But ultimately, our revenues are kind of in line, right? And then if you look to the next year, $1,954,600, you see we just kind of pushed it over. We just, everything's kind of in line. Like, if this number would have went to like $3 million, then you guys would be, unless a Walmart's come in, we just don't know what we're doing, okay? And the reason that that's scary is because if we overestimate our revenues and then we budget those numbers, and then all of a sudden, your different departments say, well, wait a minute, I'm spending my budget. And then all of a sudden they spend more that's coming in, and you can't blame them because they stayed within their budget. They're not gonna give any of it back. And so you have to be kind of conservative, you have to be kind of accurate on your revenues, and then you start budgeting. Now I'm gonna give you one more little thing that you might not know. Whenever we're talking about governmental expenses, the word is called expenditures. So I'm going to use the term expenditures when we're talking about the general fund, and then when we get over to the utility fund, we'll call it expenses again. And that's a little different, but it is kind of a formal term. All right, so this is the general fund. Now let's flip over to page 10, and what you're going to see here in the general fund, you're going to have different types of expenditures, and you have different departments. And the first department that you would see would be this general and admin department, and that's going to be where all you guys fall, and your mayor, maybe your attorney. You'll have some different health insurance and different things in there, and looks like you got some parks and stuff in there too. Next year we may break some of that out a little bit. This year again we just kind of followed what you had. I see some on page 11. But anyway, we'll look at that next. Well, that's just probably maintenance utilities. But anyway, if you go to page 12, you can see that total general and admin, our projected expenditures were 966,000, and we're simply amending it to 926. That means that maybe we built in some cush when we originally did it, and, you know, we don't need it. And so let me tell you one more thing about doing a budget. You don't want to have a budget violation, and this is how you can have a budget violation. If your actual expenditures are more than 5% of your budget expenditures, the difference. And so what happens is, a lot of times, it's better to put a little cushion there and bump the numbers up a little bit so that you give yourself, in case some bill, you know, we're not trying, it's not like throwing darts, we're not trying to hit right in the center. We're not trying to be perfect with it, we want to give a little cush. And then when it comes to the expenses, you want to, if you're, excuse me, when it comes to the revenues, if your actual revenues are 5% less than your budget revenues, you have a budget violation. Because they don't want you to, again, they don't want you to get excited and over budget revenues when realistically you're not gonna hit that number. And then they don't want you to under budget expenditures for the public, and then you go ahead and spend 5% more. Then you're gonna have a budget violation. So sometimes we're very conservative with the revenues. A lot of times they'll come in a little bit more, and that's good, because you don't have a problem there. And sometimes you build in a little bit of cush with the expenditures, because, you know, usually you want your actual to come in under. But you are restricted by fund balance plus revenues, okay? So anyway, these numbers came out pretty good, they look pretty good. Let's just look on page 12, just kind of keep going down. Got some expense there for the museum. Then you go down to public safety, looks like fire department, some of the fire department expense in here. And then your police department. You can see that the numbers are pretty consistent. Now, if you notice the fire department, original budget was 237, it goes down to 134. For the amended, it jumps back up. There was $70,000 in capital expenditures in there. It looks like we don't spend it all, and maybe a few other numbers were less. They budgeted some money for firemen. It looks like it's going to be a little less in this, and then we just, being conservative, we built our cush back in for next year. We're not trying to give raises, we're just trying to have a little cushion in the budget. What's really happening. This doesn't mean that you can go out and pay more. You'd have to approve raises, but we're just, you know, we're normally we get with everybody, say, here's what your people are making, you know, run some accurate numbers. We're a little rushed on this, but I think we tried to do a good job for you. But this is kind of what we're doing here. We've got a little push built into next year's proposal, okay? Same way with the public police department. You go to page 13 and then page 14, you can kind of look at the original proposed and then amend it, and then what we're proposing for next year. Now, as you're going through this, what you should be seeing are the different departments in the general fund. You know, and you should see what makes up your revenues for the general fund. You see, you got the fire department, public safety, streets and sanitation. That's going to be paid out of your general fund. Now let's go to page 15. I want to show you a little something here. When you get down to page 15, right in the middle, you see excess revenues or expenditures, and you have parentheses. And amended budget looks like we're going to be about a negative 390,000. But what that means is, that means that your general fund is not self-sufficient, okay? That means that you have more expenses in there than you do revenues, okay? And so technically, you would have a loss, okay, from operations. Now, I'm gonna explain to you how you plug the hole here in a minute. But whenever you see that negative, that means that your expenditures were more than the revenues, okay? And so we look at all the revenues that really fall into the general fund, then all the expenses in the different departments, and you have you spent more, okay? But the way you plug that is you transfer some money in from your utility fund, okay? And that's what's happening here. You have to transfer some money in from the enterprise fund to plug the hole. And so that's very common in a lot of towns. What you have to make sure you're doing is collecting all your billings in the utility fund, because you're needing some of that money to plug the hole over here. And you gotta always have a real balance, because if your loss is too much in the general fund, then you're having to raise your utility rates quite a bit so that you can transfer that money in. So, you know, you always have to manage your expenses, your expenditures in the general fund, or you wind up having to plug that hole, and if the hole gets bigger, you have to transfer more money in, okay? And so right now, this is just kind of the budget, it's just kind of understanding of it. You know, I'm not overly familiar with everything that goes on here yet, but this is how the budget works, okay? So when you see that negative, you know we have a hole in the bucket, we had to transfer some money in to plug it. And that happens on most towns, but, and so most of the time, things like police department, fire department, they're not self-sufficient. They're, you know, if they had to write $300,000 worth of police fines, you'd be a ticket town. So, you know, they bring a certain amount of police fines in, and then their budget, and what you have to look at is, do we have, you know, your excess, your sales tax, property tax, all those things that kind of help make up their budget, okay? So anyway, that's just a thought. There's more stuff you can look at. And then at the very end, we have this fund balance. This is the carryover from last year. And so in your general fund, you have $1,122,000 in what's called, in your fund balance, meaning your assets are more than your liabilities. And so that gets carried over. And so technically, you could actually budget a loss in a fund. Like for instance, let me give you an example. Let's say you had $2 million in the bank, in the fund balance, and you said, we want to do $1 million worth of work in the park. That's gonna be way more than we're bringing in, but it's gonna cut into our carryover funds, but we still have enough carryover funds to do it. So you could budget a loss. It's not a great idea to do it every year, but it is sometimes you do it for big projects where you're gonna go out and, you know, do something. I've seen City Ponchatoula do them, and they were doing a lot of renovations on parks and hitting all the parks. You know, they had a lot of, but they had, you know, had the money to do it, okay? So it is possible to do that sometime. Let's go to page 16. And some of these are not as exciting, so we'll, so the word special revenue fund, let's talk about that for a minute. This is called special revenue fund in the fire department. Now let me explain something to you here. Under parish allocation, which is about the third little deal down under revenue, y'all see that? Okay, all right, so Fire District 2 under Terranceville Parish government, what they do is they come over and they get with volunteer fire departments, and they get property tax and different revenues from their millages, and then they'll contract with these volunteer fire departments, and they'll give them an allocation of that money to cover fires, you know, usually outside of the city limits, different things. And so, in your case, you're including it as part of your component unit of your financial statements. A lot of times, you may have an Albany Fire Department, and they'll get that allocation, and their financials are separate. They don't get necessarily included with the parish government or any other town. But in your case, it's getting included. So the parish allocation is money that's being spent for fire prevention here in Kentwood. I don't think you guys are seeing the money. I think they're paying it or reimbursing, you know, maybe paying expenses for you, something like that.
Gerald, isn't that the portion for the reimbursement on the Fire District 2 officers, or is that on the separate account for the town of Kentwood Volunteer Fire Department.
Yeah, that's part of the town is paying is when we get firemen to respond within the city limits, they pay per call from them. What that part is from the town.
Right.
We pay all the salaries of the ones working out the other station out of Fire District 2 money. The town pays it and then they're reimbursed from the parish out of our money in the district.
Yeah, that's for calls outside of town. And then in town, I guess you guys are responsible. And that's the way Fire District 2 works, is they contract with these volunteer fire departments to cover calls outside of the city limits, okay? And so that's what's happening here. We don't have a lot of say over how much they allocate different things. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that one. We just kind of carry those numbers forward. Let's flip over to page 18. It's just the housing fund. I tell you what, let's jump to page 19, because I think this is kind of what another little lesson here I want to teach you here. So the word special revenue, okay? Whenever you go before the voters and you say, look, we want to issue a millage for the parks and recreation, okay? Then that millage, a portion of that property tax, gets put into this fund, the parks and recreation. And that's called a special revenue fund. In other words, that revenue is special. It has to be used for a certain purpose, okay? And so you can have property tax that comes in and people pay one payment, but a portion of it goes to this, over here to this fund, and then some of it goes into the general fund for what they call general corporate purposes, right? We just looked at that, we had that shortfall, but anyway, some of this property tax, or ad valorem tax, is called property tax, and it's going over here to your recreation department, and you got some expenses, different construction and repairs. And here's where we have the community center repairs of $50,000 that we budgeted for next year. MLK park improvements, playground lighting and equipment. And so this is your special revenue fund for your parks and recreation. So again, a fund is a self-balancing, different accounts, but you have different types of funds. And when you call it a special revenue, that means that there is some type of revenue that's designated to pay those expenditures. And it could be a sales tax, and you could have a special revenue fund that's funded by sales tax. In this case, it's funded by property tax, okay? And that's simply a special revenue fund, and it's for those expenses. And that's your, I guess your parks and recreation, is that right, Mayor? Okay, very good. So anyway, let's go ahead and look at page 20. The nursing home has its own budget. And this also would be probably a special revenue fund, or just a separate fund, I guess. And you have different rental income that comes in, different expenses for the nursing home. And so anyway, I can't tell you in great detail what they all are. I know some are just utilities and insurance, different things. But anyway, it looks like it's self-sufficient. In other words, its revenues are more than its expenses. And so it's you don't transfer anything in, it's covering its own. Y'all can see that, I guess. All right, let's go. Let's go and jump on to page 20. There's several funds in there, but anyway, we'll go to page 20. Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me take a look. Let me just take a look at what you got. Huh?
This is housing.
Okay. Yeah, we look at housing.
Mr. Abear,
Yes, go ahead.
before you go into the next thing, I
Yes.
wanted to ask you to clarify.
Okay.
When some people see these documents and they see like miscellaneous funds, what exactly does that mean?
Miscellaneous funds or miscellaneous revenue?
Well, it'll just say miscellaneous, like in the left-hand corner.
Yeah. So a lot of times, if you have like a miscellaneous revenue, it could be a combination of things. Like sometimes, you could get a reimbursement for a bill that was in the prior year. And, you know, maybe we didn't trace it out and put it against the expense, we just showed as miscellaneous. It could be that we voided some old outstanding checks, didn't clear, and that goes to miscellaneous. Or it could be, you know, and so sometimes you get a lot of different types of revenues, like people may come in and want documents, and you may charge them a certain amount for copies. So you would have copies, and then you would have some type of refund, somebody might make a donation. And if you're not careful, you could have about 40 different revenues at $20 each. And so sometimes you just kind of lump them together, and they just become like a miscellaneous or other. Now usually, that amount should not be overly material. Every once in a while, you may have a couple $1,000s in there, but usually it should not be a material account, because if it is, then you probably have something that should have its own line item, like a grant.
Yeah.
You wouldn't
So
just
it's basically a catch-all for
have a
anything.
catch-all of the small
Anything
things.
out of the ordinary or relatively unpredictable.
That's exactly right. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so it's, you have that little miscellaneous. It's not that you're really trying to hide anything. It's just that when you're doing these financials, if you broke every item out according to what it really is, you could have a lot of different little line items that don't really mean anything, you know. And but if that number were big, then you know you got something in there that should be identified. It should have its own line item, like a grant or maybe a big donation that should be identified, something like that. Anyway, that's kind of what your miscellaneous is. All right, so your housing fund, I was actually just gonna skip over, but anyway, you can kind of see what makes up the revenues and expenses in the housing fund. Now, let me see what you have on yours. I don't have the current numbers currently, so let me think it is.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so on this fund, I think we have to transfer some money in to make it balance, is that correct? Okay, I'll give this back to you.
Yeah, you're fine.
Anyway, on this housing fund, if you notice our proposed budget, and then, you know, our actual, it looks like our revenues, for whatever reason, are a little less, the amended budget, than the proposed budget. And so we budget like 412,000 in revenue, we're looking at 383. Now, based on the expenses, look like they're gonna be in line, and housing payments may be a little bit more. So we could be running a deficit in this particular fund. And if we do, then we're gonna have to go to page 22, we're gonna have to plug that hole by transferring some money in from the general fund. And so, Michelle, I think y'all had to transfer money in the prior year anyway, something y'all normally do for this particular fund.
That's correct. That's been done for quite a few years now,
Okay,
where we subsidize, the administrator salary and benefits, because admin fees that HUD pays us are not enough to cover that. So we make up the difference there.
okay. So that's what happens in this particular fund is, it's a separate fund, it's its own fund, that means its own self-balancing set of accounts, you have revenues and you have its own expenses. But in this case, the expenditures are more than the revenues, and you have a hole in your bucket, and you have to transfer some money in to plug it. And so, it's been that way for a while, and it's not necessarily a terrible thing, it's as long as but you always have to watch those things, you know, when you have, you know, when you're overextending or whatever. But anyway, now, you know, we're very good at what we do, but I haven't worked through all your stuff, so I'm not really familiar with everything in these numbers.
You don't learn it overnight.
Right, well, definitely in a couple of weeks we didn't get it in, but the thing is, we would be more familiar with it, we could probably tell you a little bit more. But right now, this is kind of what it looks like to us.
I can tell them they don't want to
Yeah.
talk to me.
So anyway, so you're, now, page, so page 22, this is where we start calling them expenses instead of expenditures. This is because this is called a utility fund, and when you have a utility fund, it might be 20, yeah. You know what, I changed mine and,
Just
then
keep
I.
that one.
Yeah,
I'll
just
share
keep
with
it,
the
yeah. And so anyway, you have your gas sales and gas purchases.
It is 23, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, sir, yeah, yeah. I had mine on my desk and I made a change, so anyway. All right, so anyway, the difference with this particular fund is, this is like a business type fund, okay? And so you have the ability to increase the rates, whereas you don't have that ability in the general fund. Like property tax, you have to go out before the, you're kind of limited in what you can do. It's gonna be about the same as it was last year, unless you increase your millage, sales tax, it'll be about the same unless Walmart comes in or something. With COVID, we did see sales tax increase in a lot of towns for whatever reason, people shop at home. But for the most part, you'll see your revenues really don't jump from one year to the next. Now, with the utility fund, you hate to increase rates, but you do have that ability. And so what you're doing is you're charging for a service. You're charging for gas or water or sewer. And because you're doing that, it's a business type fund. And when you buy an asset, you depreciate it over a useful life. Maybe it's 5 years, 10 years, something like that, just like you would in a business. So these financial statements would look more like a business. And so you have your gas sales on page 23. You go to page 24, you have some sewer sales, and then water on 24. And then if you go to page 25, you'll have your totals. Total operating revenue, start off at 1,000,007. It could wind up at 1,000,005, and then we just push it over 1,000,005 next year. And then when you go to page 26, you'll have the different types of expenses. You'll have a whole gas department, and you'll have expenses in that department that are only pertaining to the gas. Now, you may have some salary, you may have a guy that works water, sewer, and gas, and his salary may be split between all three of them. I don't know that, I haven't looked at it, but in most cases, you might have something like that. Or you may have at least a guy whose salary is split between water and sewer, and sometimes it's water, sewer, and streets. And so that's kind of the way that works. You have just a few maintenance guys, and they do everything. You may have them in each department. And so there's your gas department. Let's flip over to 27. And so these are just additional expenses that are in that particular department. Of course, you got your sewer. And really what we're doing here is we're just kind of bringing them forward. I don't know the detail of any of these numbers. I know what they are, but anyway, 28, 29 water. And then page 30. Now, let's see what else we got. 30 and 31. Okay, so what you have here on page 30, it looks like we're running a profit from operations. It looks like our revenues are more than our expenses. And so you see a net ordinary revenue and on page 30. We budgeted 411, we're gonna finish up with about 436. And we budget about 380 next year, okay? Just being conservative. And we flip over to page 31. Now, anytime you look at a utility fund, you're gonna see something called ordinary revenues and ordinary expenses. And then you're gonna have something called non-ordinary revenue and expenses. And so the non-ordinary would be, if it's an expense, it could be where you're transferring money to the general fund to plug the hole over there. Or maybe you're getting some type of grant or some other type of revenue that's not, so in your particular utility fund, ordinary revenues are gas sales, water sales, and sewer sales. That's your ordinary revenue. In my CPA firm, ordinary revenues are accounting fees and audit fees, tax fees. That's what we do. Those are what we do for a living. And so if we got some type of grant or something, that would be like an unordinary revenue, okay? And non-ordinary. And so in this case, when you go to the bottom, you would have, you may have some transfers. We got interest income, interest earned. Then we have a transfer to the general fund. We budgeted $700,000. I think we're gonna wind up transferring about $638,000 this year, or something to that number. And so that's to help plug the hole over there. And anyway, you have a good beginning net position, which is fund balance, retained earnings. And so, even with all that, we still have a profit. So we still have a profit. Yeah. So anyway, that's pretty much your budget. That's how your budget works. Do you have any questions, general questions? I don't know anything about all the details, but how the budget works. Go ahead, sir.
Just a general,
Yeah.
very, very pedestrian question.
All right, yeah.
When some people like look at this document, and I've sat down with some people and gone over some things in it before,
Uh-huh.
how many, I guess, accounts, like actual bank accounts, does the town have?
Yeah, okay, so you wouldn't find it in this document. And the reason is because this is revenues and expenses.
This document is basically just detailing how things should be spent
Well, no.
from certain accounts.
Yes, but what would happen is, if you wanted to know how many bank accounts, you'd have to look at the balance sheet. So in accounting, you have two different financial statements. And one is your assets and liabilities, that's called a balance sheet. And then over here, you have revenues and expenses, that's called the profit and loss. Now, you only budget revenues and expenses. So we would have to go to the balance sheet, and Michelle would probably have a bank account, 2 or 3 on the balance sheet. And you could simply count them, and then in each fund, you may have 1 or 2. And so you could have several. You can actually have several bank accounts in one fund. That's why the word fund is not cash. It's the balancing set of accounts.
Yeah, it's more of an internal system.
That's right. Well, you have debits and credits, and then they all balance, and you have different types of accounts. You have revenue accounts, and you have expenses, you have cash and liabilities, and that makes it all balanced. And so each fund has its own accounting. Everything is done within that fund. You can go to the balance sheet and see how much cash is left at the end of the year. You can do that for your rec park, your recreation program. You can go look, see how much cash you had at December 31st. It should be a reconciled cash balance.
Okay.
Yeah, but that wouldn't show up here. Only the revenues and expenses get budgeted. Okay, so Michelle could probably give you a breakdown of cash and different things like that.
Now that the books are,
And the books you can call out, yeah, just gotta reconcile it monthly, and then give some financial statements, and then come back and show you how to look at them. Any other general questions?
No, thank you. Very informative.
Okay, anybody else?
What about this custom account statement from LAMP? Is this included with this,
Is this a lamp?
right, it was a printout that was this?
Yeah, no, so that's fine, so the lamp account, and so let me tell you what a lamp is, Louisiana Asset Management Pool. And these accounts are supposed to be backed by government treasury bonds. And so you can put some of your excess money in there, and this would be on your balance sheet. This is part of your cash, but it's been transferred electronically over to Louisiana Asset Management Pool. So if you look at this, it's probably showing you the ending balance, and so it looks like it's LAMP for all of your different funds, or different accounts that you have in LAMP. Okay, so your total LAMP funds at the end of this particular period is $2,288,000. And so that means that, now some of it is in the general fund, some of it is in the utility fund, and you got some different things, okay? But yeah, that's your money in LAMP.
And this is where the restrictions, since Tre'Von had hit on that earlier, this is where some of the restrictions are on some of these funds now.
Well, so like, for instance, let's look at the ones that would have a restriction. All of these monies are not restricted. But let's look at a couple that would be, like your sewer contingency fund. Now, the reason that's restricted is because that deals with the sewer bonds. And so when you did the bond covenant, they made you put some money aside so that you can pay this bond back. Utility deposit so what happens is, there's only $2.86 in that one. We'll talk about that. Here's one, utility deposit fund, $153,000. Okay, this will never happen, but your customers come in, they have to put up a deposit. Let's say it's $50 or $100 to get utility turned on. Okay, if you have, $150,000 owed to your customers, then you need $150,000 in money put aside in case everybody came in one time and closed out. You'd be able to give them money. So that money is restricted. That's kind of a restricted cash, and that's called utility deposit fund. You have some sewer reserve fund. It looks like it's zero, but if you had something in there, it would be restricted for bond covenant. American Rescue Plan funds, okay, they've given us guidelines on how we can spend this money. Okay, and so you can spend it for, your utility and even different things.
It's already been allocated toward we want a grant and we have to put some money toward it, and that comes from this American Rescue Plan money.
Okay.
To get our sewer, our wastewater.
Okay, very good. And that's one of the things you can use it for, sewer improvements, wastewater improvements. And so this money is restricted in the fact that you have to use it within those guidelines. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay, then bouncing off that line of questioning,
Okay.
give us an example of an unrestricted fund. Because on this paper, for instance, like when it says general fund,
Yes.
general fund is basically all this broken into different uses.
And
So how in a sense basically does the restriction work among this list of accounts for general fund when general fund is busted up into all these other distinctions?
Well, now, this is cash, and this cash is, the general fund cash is unrestricted. And what that means is, you do a budget. If you needed to transfer some of this to a utility fund, you could. If you need to transfer some of this to the housing, you can. And so when it's restricted, when it's unrestricted, you have the authority to move it around and use it as you see fit, as long as it meets general corporate purpose, or general, as long as it has a public purpose. In other words, technically you can't buy flowers if someone dies.
Yeah.
Quite honestly. But yeah,
That-
it's unrestricted, yeah.
That what you mentioned was sort of my intention for the question. So when you said general fund, it's unrestricted, so you can move it into something like housing. Housing was a category under this, which states general fund on the top.
Uh-huh.
So how would that work, like in layman's terms?
Housing was a separate fund, wasn't it?
Right.
It
Yeah.
was okay. I didn't see it here, so I just assumed it was.
Go back in there. it's
Yeah,
separate.
Yes,
so
it's separate.
housing is a separate fund, but guys, the way you would move it, it would come in on the bottom as a transfer in and a transfer out of the general fund, and they would balance. So in the general fund, it wouldn't be an ordinary expense, it would be an unordinary expense. We're transferring some money from the general fund, like maybe some of this $1,111,000, and so it's gonna show as a transfer out to housing, and over here it's gonna show as a transfer in from the general fund. Those numbers should agree. And it goes in and it goes into the bank account. So it's a two-sided entry, debit cash, credit this revenue account, or transfer in. And so, now you got this $1 million in the bank, but that $1 million, there could be other payables also, right? So let's say you got $1 million in the bank and you owe $100,000 in bills at the end of the year. So you take your assets minus your liabilities, you get what's left over. It's called fund balance. And so your fund balance would be $900,000. Okay, because you had $1 million minus $100,000. Okay, and then so you do a little math there. And so your equity, it's kind of like you did a net worth for the bank. Here's my assets, this is what I owe on my house. You subtract it, this is your net worth. All right, so this $1 million that you're looking at, it's unrestricted, but the board could come in and designate some of it. Now, they haven't done it, okay? But you got this $1 million in the bank, and the board could say, look, again, let me get back to that. We're building this new community center. We want to designate $100,000 of this cash for the construction of that community. Now, that's a board designated. It's not a third-party restriction. And the board could come back and say, look, that project it's going to fall through. We're going to undesignate that money.
So that's unrestricted.
Sir?
Unrestricted.
It's unrestricted, but it would be designated. Restricted is when it's out of your hands.
Right.
It's out of your hands at that point.
So this 680 is out of hands.
680 is
Wait,
out of
what
your
is-
hands
what are
to
you
some,
talking
the 680 is out of your hands.
The
It has to
680
be
is out of
spent.
our hands.
Oh, yeah.
It has to be spent
Right.
within guidelines.
Right.
Yeah, but the guidelines are pretty,
Yeah, you gotta go.
the guidelines are pretty, open as long as you're using them for water and sewer improvements, stuff like that. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, no, I just want to clarify one in particular.
Okay.
This American Rescue Plan funds, and I'm just trying to, because this is actually in my notes that I took as
Okay.
well.
All right.
When I looked at this, how did we officially come to making this designated?
No,
The American Rescue for the water sector program.
okay, now, you didn't, what happens is, in order to get those funds, you had to submit your budget to whoever this is that issued it. And they looked at your budget and they said, we're gonna allocate this much money to you. Now, when they allocated it to you, they said, this is how you can spend it. And because of COVID, we're trying to give this money, some of the guidelines would be, you can improve your water and your sewer systems. Those are guidelines, you could spend it. If you had a lot of crime in your area because of COVID or after COVID, you could use it to hire new police officers. But what he's saying, it sounds like he is using it within the guidelines that they want you to use it for, if you're improving some type of water or sewer system.
Right.
And so what you've done is earmarked it for this project but you could change it. But since you have this project, you can
Don't
use
say
it for that.
because
Yeah, well,
it's
don't-
not-
No, it's,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
what I'm
it's
saying,
not
that,
so.
you're not saying it's something that we would do,
Right.
but I'm just clearing the air
Yeah,
of the difference between,
right,
board designated
right,
versus,
The state did that.
right.
right,
Federal government actually.
right,
No,
yeah.
No,
Yeah,
they
No,
didn't.
no. The ops money has a wide variety of uses.
Right.
Right,
What
well,
I'm, go ahead.
in that, when we decided to, buy
How
the
did we
points,
decide?
we voted on whether we were gonna use that money to buy the points for the, awarding of the grant to do the sewer and the water. That's
Did
what,
we,
yeah.
and I think this is something I could confuse. So did we do that by ordinance, or how did we do that? I'm just trying to,
We voted on, we had Mr. Cozan on the phone.
now last meeting, this is coming to my notes. I know that we said we were going to discuss it further, how we were going to use the fund. That's what we said. But it seemed like if you look in the budget, it was just automatically decided we're gonna take this 400, which that's fine. But it's like we're gonna take that
That was on the
400,000
first round
and
last-
automatically designate it
last
toward
year.
So who came to that official decision?
There was a meeting.
Is
a
what
pro-
I'm saying.
I don't think he was
Last meeting, we didn't discuss
It's
it.
not last meeting, we did this a
Last-
while back.
No,
When we
last meeting, when we talked to Mr. David Cozan,
he said we
And
had
we
been
had-
awarded.
that's correct. Nothing at that point was official. At that point, because there were certain things that we had not been awarded, right? So the discussion was still happening, correct?
No, we had voted on him to put that toward.
So why is it
buying
on the
pump.
agenda today to be voted on with the contract with David
So
Cozan?
they
that we
would
were
be
going
able
to
to
an agreement?
start the work.
So therefore, it's not official.
No, about a year ago, we had a
I'm
meeting.
not talking
It
about
was
a
it
year
was
ago.
when these things happen on a timeline since we're dealing with reality here. We had a meeting about a year ago. There was a projector. David Kozan said our water system, he'd rate it like a D or something like that. Then we decided to use the American Rescue Act funds for the water project.
how we just
But
took $30,000 to
let
pay
me
raises
finish. Let me
to
finish,
give a
please.
stipend?
But there was, I think, some amount or something we needed to do extra that we had to apply for extra funds
So how
for.
do we just remove $30,000 out of it to give our employees, what, $1,500 stipends a pay? I mean, raises, it's a stipends, I mean. So therefore, I'm just further clarifying what he's saying,
Is this
that
a-
there are certain things that are up to the board. Basically what I'm saying is, how did we come to this conclusion? Show me the documentation, was it in the ordinance? Show me the minutes that we voted on it. Who came to the decision? Because it's in the mayor's, and I'm not trying to make a fuss about it, which this was in my notes. I'm just trying to clarify.
If you give me about 5 or 10
Because
minutes, I could probably
it's the
find
same
the minutes
situation
where we.
that we ended up in with the Parks and Recreation.
I don't think
Why
you were
everybody
here for
wants to
that
know?
meeting.
No, I was here.
I don't think you.
I was here.
He's
We
talking
just talked
a year
about
ago.
We just talked about it.
This is initial. This is actually the second round that we were approved in.
I understand.
The first
But if
round,
we
no,
took
you're not listening, so you
$30,000
can't understand, you're not
Okay.
understanding. Just listen a minute.
I've been listening the whole meeting. I'm listening.
This is the second round of funding that David Kozan was on the phone talking about. The first grant round, we were not approved because we did not
I'm
have.
about the grant. I'm talking about the ops money that we
Dumb,
already
just
had.
dumb, just dumb.
So you're saying that you didn't get a first distribution? Why didn't, because you didn't have your budgets turned in? Why didn't you? I'm just
What you mean first
What was
distribution?
it?
Okay, so ARP funds,
We got two
Two,
payouts.
yeah, two,
right? We
yeah,
got one
yeah.
in 21 and we
that's
got
correct,
one
yes,
this summer.
yes, that's right. yeah.
We did 2 rounds of application on the wastewater sector grant program. The first round, we did not have enough points to win the almost $2 million grant that we're
Okay.
going to be
Oh, I
applying
see what
the
you're saying.
American Rescue
Oh, I see what you're
Plan
saying.
money to.
That's something different. So you applied for a grant.
That's why, in
Okay.
the second round, the 900 and something $1,000, we bought points in the application with that money in order to get $2 million.
I got you.
So the sewer rates in this town hopefully won't have to go up if
Okay.
that money is used with the $2 million grant money.
Okay.
So if that's clear,
Yeah, so obviously,
Let's just move on. I don't
Yeah.
think, my focus is not
I got you.
the grant. My focus is the ops money. What I'm just
Year and a
clarifying,
half
my
ago.
focus is not the grant, your focus is keep saying 5 points on the grant. We're talking about the budget, right? In order for this to get here, right here where it says American Rescue Plan funds, right? And I looked at it, we've already moved how much money to this that can be used for later use? What I'm saying is the money from ops don't necessarily, it can, maybe it should be, but it don't have to be used only on sewer and water. That's just my point that I'm making. And then further clarify, when we talks about designated, undesignated funds, those which are restricted. That money doesn't just have one restriction on it.
Well, you know,
Water
you're
includes
right.
the
What
rescue
you're saying is
plan
right.
wasn't
This
enough
money
to
could
do the
have been- could
project.
be used for-
That's all I'm
For
clarifying.
something else, but, you know, what you gotta work together here is, if this were a worthy project, then it's a worthy project. I'm quite sure y'all talked about it in the
Our
mayor.
sewer system's on the last leg.
Yeah,
It's
so-
never
Yeah,
done.
I'm not.
I don't think you are, I think
No.
you're trying to get knowledge or.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And just for future reference,
Yeah.
as a board,
Yeah, then
we have say when it
Communication.
comes to
Right, right,
certain
right.
dollar amounts.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
Right, okay, yeah. He's right in what he's saying, this could have been used in a variety of things
It's not restricted.
within a certain parameters. But if you're using it in those parameters and it's a worthy cost, then kudos, you've done a good job.
If your application said that's what was gonna be used on, didn't you just say
Well, so look, let me give you an
10
example.
minutes ago
Well, you could have
that,
used, if, let's say,
what do you vary,
said-
be your variation from that? Point being is, the money's gonna come from somewhere, whether we use that money
That's
or
all.
Yeah,
money
yeah,
from
yeah.
the citizens'
That's all I'm saying.
pockets on an increase of a bill.
well, no,
And
and you're
that's
right.
gonna be it,
You're right, but I
bottom
mean,
line.
I'm okay.
You're using it to get a big project, which is
That's
really
right.
good, cause you need some matching money.
That's right.
But, you know, if you wouldn't have gotten this big project and you had to use it just as to get some improvements done, you could have used it like that. But, you know, if you got this big project, it's gonna help the town, well, that's great, I've done your homework, you did good. And you're right, it could be used within parameters and it could be used
Correct.
different ways, you know, down.
But those parameters you're stating is that the restrictions in effect say you can't buy a statue. with
No,
money
no,
or
that's
something
right.
like that.
But you
There are
could-
certain things
But
you need
could
to
buy,
use the
like,
money for.
manholes for your sewer department if you needed to do that.
Yeah, I think that's where the confusion comes from. It is restricted in a sense that there are some things you cannot buy
That's
with
right.
that money.
That's right, you can't go outside those parameters, but you could take some of it and say, we need to buy this manhole cover and fix that because it goes to the sewer.
And I think
Hypothetically.
my only, to just clarify that,
Yeah,
wasn't to create any confusion,
yeah,
because we've had instances before, like we talk about the ad valorem tax that was passed some time ago with the recreation fund.
okay.
The question came up, people wanted to know, well, if it was supposed to be used for just general recreation purposes, how was it, or at what point was it decided upon that it was gonna be used to pay $1 million bond? And so that is the question why I think going forward, it needs to be very clear on what the board is doing, when we're doing it.
Well, I think what you have to do, so whenever you presented that to public to vote on it, maybe, you know, some of that revenue, you may have stated it, may have been stated
was.
in the
It
property.
was.
And so, if it were, then what's happening is, here's the way, look, over at Ponchatoula, this is the way it works. In their Ponchatoula Rec Park, they built that whole thing on bonds. You know, they go, money was debt, right? So they go and they borrow money and then they build the park and then they come and they pop a millage on me and I'm paying this millage, which is okay, my kids will all play there. But part of that millage goes to pay that debt and then the rest of it goes to operate some of the park. And so it's understood that they're paying the debt because they wouldn't have enough revenue to pay the debt.
That's right.
And the other thing you have to realize, you wouldn't get that debt unless the people who issued it said, how are you gonna pay for it? In other words, they're gonna wanna make sure you have revenue to pay for it. And so it's probably restricted for debt first,
Correct.
and then after.
We have a scenario pretty much exactly like what you were saying. So like
Yeah.
money for recreation in the town of Kentwood, I think approximately about 75% of the actual amount is used to pay a bond for the North Tangi Recreation Park.
Right.
So it works exactly the
Yeah,
same.
yeah,
way.
and-
We've
and-
talked about it before.
And look, and that is the one thing that is restricted, because what's happening is, again, when a town sells bonds, they're municipal bonds, what that means is people are going to Ever Jones and buying town of Kentwood bonds in their investment portfolio. You default on these things, then they lose their money. And so that's why these bond covenants are set up to not let you default. When you get a property tax in, they say 75% goes here. They want you to put that there first, and what's left, then you can buy lights and equipment and stuff like that. And so that's probably the only reason you got that bond is because you had a way to pay for it. And see, the state bond commission would have to approve it before you could get it, and that's what would
It's
happen.
a long process.
Yeah.
Because the recreation millage is 8.9 mills, the total millage that was passed was 14.9 outside of what we already had.
Yep.
And in all the documents, which are about 3 inches thick, it states in there that what you're doing is borrowing against future revenues of property taxes.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
they estimate what you get in annual property taxes
Yeah,
based on that 8.9
Yeah, somebody
or
ran some numbers.
14.9. That's
Somebody ran
right.
some
Hello.
numbers.
Basic
Okay.
loan economics.
So,
Basic loan economics.
yeah,
Right,
so,
but I mean,
so then that's what
they
determined
figured if you did a certain millage, it was gonna bring in this
that
much revenue.
75% payback annually.
Yeah.
Thanks for breaking it down and wait till I've been waiting 4 years for this.
If you would communicate, you would already know that.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abraham.
All right,
This ends our public hearing. We'll now move into our Town of Kentwood Council meeting for December the 28th, 2022. It's now called to order. We'll have prayer by Mr. Hookfin, pledged by Councilman Cooper.
Oh God, how we thank you tonight, God. We thank you for bringing us across this year, God, as we get ready to approach a new year, God. We say thank you now. God, we thank you for the town of Kentwood as a whole. We thank you for elected officials as well as our new elected officials, God. We pray now that you would just shine a light upon Kentwood and move and continue to move us where we need to go, oh God. God, we pray now that this meeting tonight be done decent and in order. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Hookfin,
Here.
Cooper,
Present.
Diamond,
Here.
Callahan, Winters. Public is invited to have public input on agenda items, 2 minutes per agenda item. Must be recognized by the chair before speaking. Item number 1, motion to approve liquor license renewal for 2023. Incomplete applications or applications not received will not be approved. Good times, Daiquiri.
So moved.
Been moved by Councilman Hookfin, second by Councilman Callahan to approve liquor license for Good Times Daiquiri. Any questions? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item number 2, motion to approve donation of 2 vehicles from parish government. It's a 2012 Ford Expedition and a 2012 Chevrolet truck. I believe it's a Silverado.
Question. The expedition, I'm just asking, will be used for the,
Administrative,
Right. Okay.
office.
and the truck will go to the maintenance department?
Yes, sir.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hookfin and second by Councilman Cooper to approve the donation of vehicles from parish government. Any questions? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Motion to approve surplus property as listed. We previously surplus to some property and we're getting values on those to advertise. So this was just the last cleanup that Russ had found at the maintenance barn, I believe.
Moved by Councilman Callahan and second by Councilwoman Winters to approve the surplus property in question. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item number 4, approve amendments to fiscal year-end 2022 budget and adopt fiscal year-end 2023 budget along with detail of salaries as required by LRS 334041.
So
Mayor,
It's moved by Councilman
I said,
Hookfin.
You said second, didn't you?
no, I said second. I said I had a comment.
Okay.
I think Councilman Diamond beat me to it though.
Okay, question?
Along with the detail of salaries, where is that at?
Where's Phil? He doesn't do it like Bruce does it, but it's the same carryover, but I'll let you hear it from him. Or Bruce did.
Yes, sir.
Detail of salaries, we're getting ready to approve it, and the detail of salaries is not in here. And Councilman Diamond has a question.
On the ordinance, you know, we never, you know, whenever we do that, a lot of times if you're, you know, if the mayor or the police chief or whatever wants to give raises, you know, we would make mention of that or what have you, but we don't ever list it in the ordinance, like y'all have in the past. The ordinance that you have is kind of what we have. The ordinance is just adopting the budget. Now, we didn't necessarily budget raises per se, we just kind of carried the numbers forward, Mayor. So did you have raises in here, or are you just adopting the salary as they were
As they were.
as they were from last year? And you just carry them forward?
Right.
Well, so those numbers, we didn't reduce it, we didn't increase it, it's still the same. In other words, it's there. The ordinance, but it's not detailed in the ordinance now. Let me take a peek at this one. So you're approving the salaries as they were being carried forward? And for anybody in particular, or just everybody? Or
Everybody.
okay. Well, it's okay.
They're used to seeing.
Used to seeing, okay.
There's usually a second page, and it has everyone listed by what their department is and how much they make per hour salary.
Yeah, well, yes, you're lucky to get it. Sure, no,
Because
I'm just,
we know you started.
no, I'm just kidding. But really, we don't normally, that's not always done. And now, unless you're giving raises, usually the budget kind of just covers everybody's salary. In other words, so if the police department or a fire department, or you wanted to give a raise, and that might be spelled out in the message, or the council would know about it, and it would be budgeted or increased in the budget. But just adopting the same that you already have, it's already included in the total salary numbers.
And that's what the ordinance says, right, that's in the,
Yes,
in the
yes.
bound book.
Yes, that,
It says the same thing that's in the prior year is being adopted for the next year.
yeah, now so when you look at expenses, they, some of them increased by less than 1% or 1%, and it wasn't to give a raise, it's just to, the numbers are really very close. You roll them forward. But we did not meet with the mayor or anybody else, and they tell us we want to budget raises. And I don't think that was his intent. I think it's, everybody's getting paid what they got last year, and so that salary number is still being rolled forward. Is that okay? 'Cause that was our intent, the mayor. And so, so we don't have a schedule of what everybody makes. But I don't think you're gonna cut anybody's salary tonight, are you? So you would just be adopting the budget, moving everything forward.
That wasn't in my motion.
What's that, sir?
That wasn't in my motion.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
It wasn't in mine either, but an assumption, what if that was the case? I'm just saying, which is not, I'm just saying.
Right.
It's just not there, but it was stated, but we can move on.
Well, I think if you were gonna talk about employee, you have to.
Go into executive session.
Yeah,
Right.
right, yeah. And then you have to let them know that, I think they
Ahead of time.
Yeah, so anyway, that you have, there's some things you need to step in and step through, but here we're just carrying everything forward, there's no raise.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it,
That's
question,
Yeah,
even though we adopt this, approve this tonight, the new mayor and the council can go back and if they wanna increase the salaries. Am
Yeah.
I correct?
yes,
Okay.
and they would have to, do some, amend the budget, and
Right.
some approval, that type of thing,
Right.
but,
The only provision thing that goes for salaries is you can't decrease a salary
well, no, so
while there's a term going on. It applies for the next term, correct?
Elected officials is what he's speaking.
Oh, that's just elected official. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I think we just select official, and I don't think you could, so wait a minute. Okay, so here's another thing too. You have to propose a budget, and if for some reason you weren't able to do it by the timeline, and let's say you guys just wouldn't do it, or you just couldn't get along, or couldn't agree, well then you would, technically, you have to use half of the prior year budget.
Right.
And so, so getting an operating budget, this is an operating budget, so the guys, so January 1st,
They can kill them.
you keep moving
That's
on,
right.
and you don't have to, you know, you don't have to slow operations down. And so
Yeah.
there are no raises in here, but this is an operating budget where we don't think things are gonna go down per se, but we've kind of rolled the numbers forward and, you know, January first, you would have adopted your budget. Now, technically, the way the law reads, if you hadn't done that, it's half of the prior year budget. So you've essentially cut your budget and handcuffed the town. And so knowing that, you probably wanna get your budget amended and approved, you know, so you can operate. And I think the thing that the mayor did that was good is he was trying to put some line items in there that were essential for the park and trying to make some improvements there. That's kind of what I see. And then the police chief and fire chief had some equipment issues that they wanted to. But other than that, those were the only big things that were in there. That everything else was just kind of carrying forward the normal operating expenses.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right.
It's already been, yes, sir.
Okay, I have another motion, but bear with me, it's a lengthy one. Okay, I'm gonna be extremely blunt with y'all one last time. Due to irresponsible spending habits of past administrations, the efforts made during your administration to combat those wrongs and the risk of history repeating itself in the future, I move to amend the budget proposal to restrict all unrestricted accounts in the town of Kentwood's budget, with the functional intention being that expenses that do not fall under the specific description of the account in question must be approved by vote of the board or formal de-designation.
Well, let me say something before y'all can discuss it, but, so under the Larson Act, which is what you guys operate under and what you're created, you don't have a line item budget. You know, we break it down in line items because we're budgeting and we estimate the revenues and we budget the expenses. So the line items that we laid out are nothing more than guidelines, right? And so, you know.
I want to interrupt you for a second.
Yes, yeah.
That wasn't a line item made with intent. It wasn't made with intent for line items. It was basically saying that nothing can move from general fund to utility fund. Nothing can move from any fund to another fund without de-designation or vote by the board. It basically locks all funds within their funds until the time comes.
Well, I know that Michelle has to move some money over to the housing just to cover expenses. So either you'll have to have a meeting every time she needs to do that, or you need to give her permission to operate.
It's done.
Is do it on these.
Yeah, it's feasible.
Is do it
What
on
do you
It's
these.
not like, no.
It's
What he's saying is done in other respects. It's not
that
like-
was just an example. It was basically these. Yeah.
Well, I think, yeah, so what you need to do is get some financials, accurate financials, you need to look at them, discuss them. You know, if something's going wrong, you need to ring the bell and have some good discussion, you know. I know y'all had some problems in the past, so, you know, we don't want that to happen again.
Within that motion, there'll be a lot of bell ringing.
All right.
So we have
I got my motion on the table.
a motion to approve our budget as is
Right.
by Councilman Hookfin. Can I get a second? And then we'll come back to yours. Can I get a second to approve item number 4 on the agenda?
Failed for lack of a motion.
Okay. So approving the amendments to the budget and adopting the 23 budget has failed.
Man, we cannot, excuse me, Mayor, can I say
If
something?
he does his amendment with this, then that may be what the board wants.
I understand that. I mean, we cannot continue to handcuff this town.
It hasn't been handcuffed. That's the problem.
Yeah, I agree with you.
One in excess of $1.5 million was frivolously spent before we even got here, and I would want to say this. I commend Mayor Bates for working on the
I do
deficit.
too.
It was about $290,000 deficit. I had a whole write up about it. People didn't like that I put it up there, but it was the facts. But we were able to decrease it over time. We risk being in the same bucket we were 4 years ago with a budget, a deficit the same, maybe even more than that. So that's the reason for this motion. So my motion still stands.
So what motion, because we have to get into something.
We
What
have a
motion
motion.
on the floor? Councilman Hook, any motion on the floor?
Mine's failed.
We had a motion to approve this.
Y'all was-
coming up.
y'all was
23.
talking.
I'll get with you.
Mine's
And
failed. So
we did not
Tre'Von's
get a
on the,
second. So that
floor
one
now.
failed.
So man, if I was having a discussion, or you maybe you weren't paying attention? Or you just want to
No, because I'm moving on with the.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine, but I mean, I just,
But I didn't know you were
Councilman.
having a discussion. Nobody got my attention.
My apologies.
Council.
Yeah, again, I'm gonna try to say this as professional as I can. You got a simple task, passing an operational budget on to the next administration. This meeting wasn't come to talk about one man's opinion over there about who done did what in the last administration. All y'all are simply trying to do is pass an operation budget
For the next.
for the next year.
that's it.
And then everything can be in check. The motion he made about restricting everything, what in the, I mean, you basically telling that the next administration coming in here, you're gonna have some money, but it ain't gonna be at your disposal. Simply pass the budget and let us handle the rest.
Mayor Bates.
It has failed.
It has
Well,
failed.
I think the confusion is like you said, you got the board members, they talking,
Right.
when somebody is
And-
trying to explain what's on the
and you know
board.
my-
I think most people didn't
Yeah.
realize what was up to be voted on.
I specifically
Mayor,
said
right.
Councilman Hookman has motioned and. for
it's not
our-
unlawful for us to have a discussion.
It was very
So
clear.
My apologies on it, man, I should have maybe notified you that we were trying to get a clear understanding of what was, actually happening here. But, before,
But Mayor, one more question, I'm done, I promise. As the gentleman was stating, you don't have to pass anything.
You
If
know,
it's
bring on
gonna be a-
50%.
Yeah, you don't have to pass anything. The way it looked like it need to be the next administration making decisions anyway.
And you may have to, because this
Well, I
has
mean,
failed.
just don't pass anything, send it to us.
Item number 5.
Hold up, Mayor, his,
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you, just give us a brief synopsis of your motion so we can get a second and we can,
My motion was to amend and then approve that amendment. That's what it,
you got me confused now.
you can amend and
Item
approve.
4 plus his,
Okay,
plus his,
uh,
motion.
Councilman Cooper's motion to restrict
Restrict unrestricted accounts in the town of Kentwood financials.
for the fiscal year 2023 budget.
Yes.
He has a motion. Can we get a second? Can we get a second? Can we get a second?
I do want to say though, that this doesn't lock up the town's money where they'll walk in on January the 1st and they won't be able to spend a single cent. That's absolutely not the function of this. That just means that there's limited liquidity between accounts where you can't say, okay, I'm gonna move this from this fund to that fund with reckless abandon. It has to be approved, which is completely possible. He said that works under the legalese of all of this.
Seemed to me that nothing
Mayor,
passed.
may I say
You have to
something?
recognize by the chair at this moment.
Yes, and then you'll come to
Yes,
Mr.
yes,
Jones.
I'm gonna get up and say this.
Got
As
2
a new-
minutes.
Thank you. As a new mayor-elect, just let me say, our council-elect and the new mayor-elect is ready to do what we need to do to take care of our people, okay? And the outgoing council and mayor, you don't have to worry about us taking care of the town and the people and the money that's here for the town. Cause we gonna do what's right. We don't even know how to do what's wrong, cause we work in the right way, okay? So you don't have to restrict it, whatever, you don't have to do that, because, we work the right way. We do the right things, okay? So, this administration and this administration, it's two different ones.
Thank you. Mr. George?
Thank you.
Yeah, and sitting here in the cheap seats, there seemed to have been some confusion when Councilman Hookfin made the motion to approve the amendment and the new budget. There was discussion going on back and forth, and I do believe that the council people may not have understood, although I did hear you say it, but may not have understood that there was a request for a second on that motion. As a citizen of Kentwood, I ask that the motion, that Councilman Hookfin renew his motion and take it up. And maybe it doesn't get seconded, and maybe it doesn't get passed, and maybe it gets shifted over to the next administration. But I think that just reading the body language, I think it can get passed tonight, and I ask that you do that.
Motion to open that up again.
I don't think you did, just the clarification.
We'll move back to item number 4 with a clarification on motion. We'll go back to Councilman Hookfin's motion to approve or adopt the fiscal year 2023 budget. He already has a motion on the floor. Can we get a second?
Second.
I was,
Go ahead. Let it-
I was saying, we were exactly what you said. I was fixing to second it
Right.
right when they did.
Right.
We were just still trying to clarify what we were saying.
Correct. It's trying to keep clarity, that's all.
We've been for this, to second it the whole time.
Okay.
I was.
So item number 4 has been motioned by Councilman Hookfin and second by Councilwoman Winters to approve or adopt fiscal year budget 2023. Any questions? Any questions? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Uh,
Any opposed?
Absolute nay.
Motion carries.
Mayor, and I do just one thing, Councilman Cooper, I understand what you're trying to say and where you're coming from. I've heard this scenario, before, but I think with it being in the midst of us kind of changing administration, the timing is, kind of just not right. But I do think, you just kind of have to look at each administration and just kind of see, how the spending is going. And I think we can come back if it becomes an issue, with this next administration. I do think if it becomes an issue, I don't think so, but if it becomes an issue, I think what you're saying is suitable in that scenario. But I do get where you're coming
I'm glad to get where I'm coming from. I hope history don't repeat itself.
from. Got you?
Number 5.
Motion to introduce ordinance to make a three-way stop at Avenue E and 13th Street.
Councilman Callahan, you want to talk about that?
Yes. We've had, lots of complaints of people that are on 13th Street between Avenue G and Avenue A. It's a long stretch, it's about 6 blocks long, and, people want speed bumps and different things there. Well, right at Avenue E, there's the hill, it's a hill there, you can't see on both sides. What we're proposing is put a three-way stop there where people will have to stop and about in the middle of that stretch. And,
Give them a better description of where it is so they'll know.
yeah, well, okay, it's. Avenue A, most people know where that is. At the end up here, it turns south, that's 13th Street. It goes down to Tommy Simmons' place there, and then it turns into Martin Luther King. But it's the same street, but it's just 13th Street now. Avenue E is one where the library is, post office, that comes out there to a T on 13th Street. And there's a hill there, and if you're coming, you can't see over. It's a long stretch, people tend to go faster, they think they're cutting around through town and going faster. And, I think we need more, I think we need several other streets, but that's, for now, that would be a start, we'll see how that works. If the police are sitting there, somebody, if they're going down the road on Avenue E, if somebody goes by, they can't tell how fast they're going. But if somebody runs a stop sign, they can tell that, and then they can stop it, it makes it easier to enforce. I think it would help.
Councilman, I totally get what you're saying, but the hill. I mean, you putting a stop sign on one side, then
Yeah.
a stop sign on another side. I'm talking about
It's not that big of a hill. I mean, but when you're driving up to it, you can't see very far down. But yeah, you can see cars coming. It's not that it's a blind hill.
Okay.
But the thing is, when you come up there, if there's a stop sign, you stop. You're looking at each other. Everybody can see each other. It's right there. It's flat on top of the hill.
And,
It's not that you're trying to look over.
Miss Janisha Johnson, who lives there in Hugh Bates' old house, plus Mr. Grayson, who lives in Mr. Buddy Morris's old house, have complained about the amount of speed which they gather from coming up the hill. And Miss Johnson does have maybe 3 or 4 kids that live there with her. So she had mentioned speed bumps, but putting speed bumps there on that right of way, on that particular street for buses and other traffic that comes through there was not really feasible. So we thought of Mr. Callahan mentioned, the 3-way stop, so we brought it to the table tonight just to, make an introduction to the ordinance. Now, you can come back with the new council. They will be the ones who actually vote to make sure it's in place. So, we can leave that up to them, to take care of that, if you all approve the introduction of the ordinance tonight.
Yeah, I do, definitely think that, we should definitely look into it. So I'm gonna make the motion that we approve it, and then, once the new council come in, any change, I think, we can, make those things. So I make a motion to approve.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Been moved and second to approve the introduction of the ordinance for a 3-way stop at Avenue E and 13th Street. In questions? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
Item number 6, motion to adopt preservation district ordinance.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hookfin, second by Councilman Diamond to approve the preservation district ordinance. Any questions? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item number 7, motion to approve amendment to engineering services on wastewater sector program.
So move.
Moved by,
Question. Mayor, go ahead.
moved by Councilman Hookfin, second by Councilwoman Winters to approve, the amendment to the engineering service on wastewater sector program. Any questions, Councilman Diamond?
Is that necessary at this particular time? With us, with the new administration coming in the next, January 1st, like 3 days away? So, this is just my opinion. I don't think that anything is gonna happen this weekend with Mr. David Cozine. So, I mean, I think that we should allow the incoming mayor to kind of weigh in on this water sector before the engineering and all that. That's just my opinion. I mean, we 3 days away from the first. So,
And
what's the rush tonight?
I understand what you're saying, but we've been working on this for so long, so I think that he can start getting things together, and we can, you and Mr. Gary, and if Miss Mary Gordon needs some assistance from Mayor Bates or any of us, we're still here.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. The business of the
I get
town
it.
doesn't stop because of an election,
Right.
No, I'm not. I'm not saying that it stops. What I'm saying is, I'm not saying that anything stops. So we're talking about moving forward, and maybe she can kind of weigh in on it. But we're talking about, because first of all, the document we have dates back all the way to 2013. So there's a whole lot of things that's wrong that I can't. But I don't want to go into it because I know y'all gonna try. So I'm not gonna go into it. But it's a whole lot wrong. But what I'm saying is, it just seems like to me, it's a rush because we couldn't take out the time to change the date from 2013 to 2023. So I mean, but if everybody in agreement tonight that this is the right engineer that we want to go with it. But I'm just saying we don't have to rush. But yes, everybody
It's the
wants to go with
same
it. So
engineer.
I get that. I get that. But we vote on agreement tonight. Councilman, do you know what we voting on? I'm just saying, because we're going into agreement basically saying that he is going to be the one that's going to carry out these services.
You've already said that.
So why we voting
You've
on it?
already said that.
And that's the thing over and over again. We already said.
All
But why are
this-
we taking an official vote? If it's been already said, we shouldn't have to talk about it.
Mayor Bates.
Which is
Well, we
what
shouldn't
we
have to vote on
discussed
it.
in the
Yes, sir.
last meeting.
If you said we already said it.
Last, come on,
I don't
Councilman,
even understand that.
We're approving basically funds and the contract, right?
What you're approving is every time the engineers take one more step forward, you all have to approve it.
Right.
And that's what the amendment is. They are ready to take one step forward.
And
They are
see-
scheduled to come out on January the 6th to look at it. And you were scheduled to come out and take a week's worth of education, and you didn't show up. And you would know that.
Are we talking
Mayor Bates,
what?
so basically what you're
Education
saying
for
is,
us on the sewer
this is the
program.
next
First
step
all-
of the
first of all,
construction, right?
Oh,
I ain't even going, I'm not going.
we're gonna move.
Did you grab the gavel and point at her? Once again, same thing, you turned around the gavel and pointed at me. But did you correct
I
her?
got her quiet.
Okay.
You didn't see me over here getting her
I
quiet.
understand.
Okay.
I understand.
Are we good?
The only thing that I'm saying is, when we're talking about going into this contract moving forward with Mr. Cozan. So it's officially decided that consulting firm, Owen and White, is gonna be the one carrying out these services.
Yep.
Have we consulted any other firms? No. I'm just asking.
No, we
And it's
didn't.
okay for me to ask these
No,
questions.
we did not consult any other firm because when we first came to the light that we were going to do this, we voted to have David Cozan and Owen Engineers to do it, Owen and White.
So, okay, all right, I got it. Maybe what I read is totally different than what we talking about. Because I skimmed through the whole thing, but hey, let's go with it, that's fine.
Because that's the only way he did the legwork to get us the grant was with their company. Owen and White.
Okay, and then here we got engineering services on other unscoped work. What, it's,
That's for a generator for and I can read these things to you, that's in your highlighted copy here.
I see it. Other unscoped, basically, what, I wish we just start being more specific.
Okay.
Mayor Bates, this is not a funding issue. It's basically just telling them they can go and do their work. Essentially, there's no funds moving around or anything, right?
So I don't forget who moved.
I did.
There was a motion and a second, so someone can do a call to order to end it.
Teddy and Audra.
Ms. Winters, okay. To approve the amendment to the engineering service on wastewater sector program. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
Motion to approve amendment to engineering services on other unscoped work for the town, but not specific in applications. Continuation of City Hall generator install specifications, which will also be reviewed on the 6th.
So once they meet on the 6th, if you all want to stop them, you have the ability to do so to the next administration.
I wish that would have been said first. I would have never even went for it. Thank you for that, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. But I do have a question about this $150,000 generator that we trying to put.
When we had the ice storm and the last hurricane, Mr. Neal had to come and work on the generator to get it started. So at that time, we had no fire service calls, no police service calls, so it needs to be looked at to perhaps upgrade to a new generator.
Sound good.
Okay?
So no purchase, so as it stands today, no purchase, has been,
Made.
made, right? Gotcha.
You see why I wanted to lie.
Okay. Can I get a
So
motion?
moved, Mayor.
Second.
Moved and second by Councilman Hookman and Councilman Cooper to approve the amendment to engineering service on other unscoped work being the generator for the city hall. Any questions? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.
Who's gonna speak to it? First one, quick. Yes, first one, feel bad. They ain't have nothing to do with the meeting.
Yeah, good run. Keep running.
It's time to make some change.
Appreciate it, sir. As a citizen now. I'm sorry you
My laptop.
Amen.
Do you need my laptop? Do you need my laptop? You said when you turn it in.
Are you real?
What you said, turn it in. I know you.
Oh, boy.